The air, thick with the scent of pine and ozone, hung heavy over the track. Ethan's pace was steady, his breathing controlled, a stark contrast to the ragged gasps behind him. Leo was falling back, his designer workout gear cinched tight at the waist, doing little to hide his flagging stamina. It was only the 17th lap. A grimace twisted Leo's pale, handsome features as Ethan effortlessly pulled ahead. A flicker of something venomous sparked in Leo's eyes, a silent declaration of war. Ethan offered a faint, knowing smirk. It was a curious thing, an Omega trying to outlast an Alpha in pure physical endurance. The thought seemed to ignite a final, desperate reserve in Leo. With a clenched jaw, he launched himself forward, a reckless, frantic sprint that carried him alongside Ethan as they crossed the finish line. He managed a single triumphant gasp, claiming he was no worse than Ethan, before a trickle of blood escaped the corner of his mouth. His body went limp, collapsing backward like a discarded doll. Before Ethan could react, a force shoved him aside. Jake, his face a mask of fury, caught Leo's falling form. He turned his crimson-shot eyes on Ethan, his voice a low growl. He demanded to know why Ethan had to push him, why he couldn't just let the Omega win. Their shared history, the years growing up together, felt like a joke in that moment. Jake and Ethan had been inseparable, two alphas who defied convention to be together. Jake had always professed a disdain for what he called the inherent weakness of Omegas, a conviction that held firm until Leo, his new roommate, arrived. Leo was a whirlwind of ambition, a star among the freshmen, always pushing, always striving. When a faulty suppressor patch revealed his secret, he had pleaded with them, his voice tight with desperation. He spoke of his dream to study engineering, of his refusal to be confined by the traditional roles of marriage and family that society expected of an Omega. While many other majors were open to Omegas, the sheer physical demands of the mechanical engineering program made it an alpha-only domain. It wasn't prejudice, it was physiology. But Jake had been swayed. He insisted that Leo was different. Soon, Jake's life became intertwined with Leo's. The subtle, milky scent of Leo's pheromones clung to Jake's clothes, a constant irritant to Ethan. Leo, for his part, played the role of the perfect friend, casually draping an arm over Jake's shoulders and joking about how Ethan's sensitivity was more Omega-like than Alpha. He would proclaim that he was all about his career, that romance was the furthest thing from his mind. Jake, charmed and amused, had accepted him completely, blind to the carefully constructed performance. Leo masterfully showcased his vulnerability, his self-inflicted struggles earning Jake's unconscious sympathy and admiration. Now, that admiration had curdled into accusation. Jake looked at Ethan as if he were a monster, then scooped Leo into his arms and sprinted toward the campus infirmary without a backward glance. "Hey man, you don't look so good." The class president's voice broke through Ethan's haze. The casual hand on his shoulder felt like a jolt of electricity. Instinct took over. Ethan seized the arm, twisted, and sent the larger man crashing to the ground. The president groaned. Him that his rut was clearly starting and he needed to go rest before he hurt someone. An alpha's rut was a volatile time, marked by aggression toward other alphas and an overwhelming instinct to claim and possess. Every rut with Jake had been an ordeal. Jake despised the feeling of being marked by another alpha, a violation of his pride. Ethan's attempts to bite him often ended in vicious fights, the rut only ending when they were both exhausted and unconscious. The president mentioned that Jake was at the infirmary and couldn't leave, asking if Ethan would be okay on his own. He had even called Jake for him. Ethan waved him off. Alone in his dorm room, the tightness in his chest wasn't just the rut. His throat began to itch. It was his asthma, an old and unwelcome enemy. He fumbled in his drawer for his inhaler and a pill, swallowing it dryly before he began to methodically throw out every gift Jake had ever given him. There would be no dramatic confrontation, just a clean break. Suddenly, a crushing weight settled on his chest. The room began to spin as he collapsed, his hands clawing at his throat, desperate for air his lungs refused to take. The medicine. Something was wrong with the medicine. A silent scream was trapped in his throat as his body began to convulse. With the last of his strength, he fumbled for his phone, his vision blurring, and dialed a number. A single word escaped his lips. Help. Jake's voice on the other end was impatient. He told Ethan to stop being dramatic, that he was busy at the infirmary looking after Leo and couldn't leave. He suggested Ethan just find someone to bite and get over it, remarking on how unbecoming it was for an alpha to be so needy. The sensation of dying was a cold, creeping paralysis. His mind was horribly lucid, trapped in a body that was failing. He felt himself being lifted, the chaotic sounds of an emergency room swirling around him. The air was thick with his own distressed pheromones, so potent they made an alpha doctor's hand tremble. A nurse's voice wondered aloud why an alpha in rut didn't have a partner to help. A cold needle slid into his arm, a maximum dose of suppressants, but the relief was overshadowed by a new presence. A wave of warmth, a scent like kerosene and scorched earth, enveloped him. A deep voice cut through the chaos, calm and authoritative, offering to soothe him. The man, tall and imposing, lifted Ethan from the gurney, unbuttoning his own collar to release a controlled stream of his pheromones. It was another alpha, yet Ethan's instincts screamed for him. Without hesitation, he lunged, his teeth sinking into the exposed column of the man's throat. The sharp, petroleum scent flooded his senses, a strange and violent comfort that finally quieted the frantic rhythm of his heart. As consciousness faded, he heard a low, husky murmur about what a fierce little thing he was. He slept, secure in the stranger's embrace. When he woke, his Omega father was speaking with a doctor in the hallway. Jake rose from a chair in the corner, his face a cold mask. He told Ethan he couldn't believe what he'd become, that this desperate stunt would only make Jake hate him more. Ethan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and beckoned him closer with a single finger. Jake, assuming he was in pain, moved toward the bed, a self-righteous lecture on his lips. As he leaned in, Ethan ripped the 4 from his arm and drove his fist into Jake's face. The crack of bone on cartilage echoed in the silent room as Jake went down. Ethan's voice was ice. He promised to make Jake's whole body hurt, that from now on, he would hit him every time he saw him. The lab tests confirmed his suspicions. His medication had been replaced. In their 4-person suite, one bed was empty. That left Jake and Leo. The culprit was obvious, but without proof, Leo would never admit it. He faced Ethan's accusation with cold defiance, his back ramrod straight, him not to let their lovers' quarrel involve him. Behind him, a look of dawning horror crossed Jake's face. He stammered Ethan's name, the realization that the swapped pills could have been murder causing his voice to tremble. He reached for Ethan, but was met with another punch to the nose. Leo flinched at the sound. Ethan calmly zipped up Leo's backpack for him, a thin smile on his lips. He mused aloud that Leo seemed awfully defensive for someone who was innocent. He explained that if he had died, it would have been murder. Since he had survived, it was attempted murder. Either way, it meant prison, and he would pursue it to the end. The color drained from Leo's face, but he shot back, accusing Ethan of targeting him out of jealousy, insisting he was only there to study. He was confident Jake would defend him, his eyes filling with a practiced, vulnerable terror as he swayed toward Jake. But he had miscalculated. Jake, to ensure Leo's safety, had installed state-of-the-art locks on their door and windows, never allowing anyone else inside. The look Jake now gave Leo was one of dawning revulsion. Throughout their next advanced engineering lecture, Jake didn't spare Leo a single glance. He didn't look at Ethan either. The regular professor was out, replaced by a younger man named Miles Corbin. Dressed in dark jeans and a crisp gray shirt that hinted at a suppressor patch at his collar, he had an air of intense, controlled power. In a class of alphas, he wasn't seen as attractive, but as a dangerous and formidable peer. Jake sent a stream of texts to Ethan, all unanswered. After class, he cornered him by the lecturer's desk, his voice filled with remorse. He apologized profusely, begging for a chance to make amends, promising to deal with Leo. Ethan simply reminded him of his promise to hit him on sight. As Ethan prepared to make good on that promise, a large hand clamped down on his arm. Professor Corbin stood over him, his presence casting a long shadow. He suggested that they take this conversation to his office. Jake bristled, demanding to know what right a substitute teacher had to interfere. Corbin's jaw tightened. With a deliberate, almost lazy motion, he reached up and peeled off the patch on his neck. The potent scent of kerosene filled the air, but woven within it was a faint, familiar trace of dark wood and amber. It was Ethan's scent. Corbin looked down at Ethan, then met Jake's furious gaze. He asked if their relationship was intimate. He thought it was, considering Ethan had bitten and marked him. He casually wondered if that qualified as intimate. The realization hit them both. This was the man from the hospital. Jake's eyes burned with a new kind of hatred. He grabbed Ethan's arm, demanding to know why this man smelled of him when Jake was his boyfriend.
Ex-boyfriend? Ethan corrected coldly.
The air crackled as Jake unleashed his own pheromones, a scent of sour wine and fury, trying to assert dominance. The room cleared out instantly. Even Ethan choked on the cloying scent. Corbin merely smiled, closing his textbook. The next moment, the scent of kerosene exploded in the room, a physical force that crushed Jake's pathetic display. It was the scent of an S-Class Alpha. Jake crumpled, his face pale, unable to speak. A strong arm wrapped around Ethan's waist, pulling him into a solid embrace. Corbin looked at Jake, who now smelled faintly of milk and fear, and remarked that he smelled nothing of Ethan on him. He declared that since he was the one who was marked, Ethan now belonged to him, and told Jake to get out of the way. Paralyzed by the overwhelming pheromones, Ethan could only manage a weak sound of protest. Corbin chuckled, effortlessly lifting the 180-pound man into his arms and walking out of the classroom. As the oppressive scent dissipated, Jake fell to his knees, his back soaked in sweat. He stayed there for a long time, head bowed in humiliation. A small, cold hand touched his sleeve. It was Leo, who had hidden in the classroom. The overwhelming display of alpha power had thrown him into a full-blown heat. Jake slowly lifted his head, a dark, calculating light entering his eyes as he looked at the flushed, panting Omega before him. Corbin deposited Ethan on the large desk in his private office. Once his head cleared, Ethan scrambled off, stammering an apology and offering to write a check. Corbin, loosening his cuffs, gave him a dry look and asked if he thought he charged by the hour. He then moved in, trapping Ethan against the wall, his voice a low purr. He informed Ethan that since he had been bitten, Ethan was now responsible. It was his first time being marked, he claimed, and after 30 years of pristine self-control, he now smelled like Ethan to everyone. A check wasn't going to cut it. His warm breath ghosted across Ethan's face. Ethan tried to explain that it was an accident, that he had just gotten out of a relationship and wasn't ready for something new. Corbin considered this, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He pointed out that his reputation was now at stake. A professor being marked and then dumped within a week was embarrassing. He suggested that, for appearances, they should date for at least a year before a respectable mutual breakup. Frustrated, Ethan ran a hand through his hair. An S-class alpha professor was not someone he could afford to anger. Corbin then unbuttoned his shirt, revealing the fading bite mark on his collarbone. He reasoned that in the early stages of a relationship, the scent should be fresh. His was fading. The implication was clear. He just needed another bite or two. It was a logical, if unorthodox, solution. Both alphas, no one was taking advantage of anyone. Resigned, Ethan steadied his racing heart and reached for Corbin's arm, leaning in toward his neck. The moment his teeth broke the skin, both their phones buzzed with notifications. The campus social media feeds exploded. Leo, in the throes of a public heat, had been found begging Jake for help. This time, Jake had simply called the campus emergency services and left him there, stating his disgust for such pathetic and troublesome omegas. The sweet, cloying scent of Leo's heat had spread through the entire engineering building, agitating countless alphas. To escape, Leo had fled into the open, crawling on his hands and knees, stripped of all dignity. Jake found Ethan in the crowd that had gathered, rushing to his side to explain himself, to prove he was unaffected by Leo's pheromones and that his disgust was genuine. Ethan cut him off, his head pounding. He was only there to see if Leo was lucid enough to understand that the police had found a partial fingerprint on the fake pills and were coming to question him. The news wiped the smugness off Jake's face and replaced the desperation on Leo's with pure terror. The scandal was campus-wide. Tampering with medication was a federal crime, but the Omega protection mandate stipulated that Omegas between 18 and 30 had to fulfill a procreation quota before serving any prison time. For now, Leo would only face a university disciplinary hearing. As for impersonating an alpha, he spun it into a cause célèbre. He launched a campaign for Omega rights, accusing the engineering department of discrimination and using the media pressure to force the school to let him stay. On the first day of their third year, he stood before an assembly and delivered a speech, glossing over his crimes and painting himself as a revolutionary. He spoke of jealousy, of the unfairness of the genetic lottery, and positioned himself as a pioneer, following in the footsteps of a legendary Omega who had graduated from the prestigious Starship piloting program 8 years prior. He was met with applause. What he failed to grasp was that the pilot had been a once-in-a-generation genius. More importantly, a Starship mechanic's role was fundamentally different. In the heat of battle, with no other resources, the last material used to patch a failing Starship was the Alpha mechanic's own body. And Omega's bone structure was simply not suited for that ultimate sacrifice. Before the advanced curriculum began, they faced a final physical assessment, a 48-hour survival trek through a tropical jungle in 4-person teams. By random draw, Ethan was grouped with Jake, Leo, and the class president. As they suited up in black tactical gear, Jake couldn't help but remark on how good Ethan had always looked, how he had fallen for him from the very beginning. Ethan told him to shut up, that his pathetic attempts at reconciliation were embarrassing. The smile vanished from Jake's face. Leo, meanwhile, had already started. His uniform cinched dramatically tight at the waist, the milky scent of his pheromones now worn like a defiant perfume, drawing stares from the other alphas. He called back to them, reminding them that he was serious about passing the test and they should hurry up. Jake scoffed under his breath, calling him a cheap pretender. Yet his eyes followed Leo's every move, his rebukes sharp every time Leo stumbled, but just as quick to ward off any other alphas who got too close. Jake was a man at war with himself, and it was pathetic to watch. 20 hours in, they reached a deep ravine spanned by thick vines. It took the weight of 2 people to cross safely. Jake and the president went first to secure the other side. 15 minutes later, they gave the all-clear. As Leo reached for the vine, Ethan grabbed him by the collar. This was the first time they had been alone since the investigation began. Ethan produced a bottle of the fake pills, the same kind Leo had used. Leo's face went pale, but there was nowhere to run. Ethan bound him with a loose vine, pried open his mouth, and poured the entire contents down his throat. If the law wouldn't punish him, Ethan would. Leo choked and sobbed as Ethan dragged him onto the vine, and they swung across the ravine, the wind swallowing his cries. On the other side, Leo collapsed, retching violently. Ethan calmly told the others that Leo was just scared and they needed to keep moving. Jake, after a moment's hesitation, pulled the president along, muttering about how the disgusting Omega was playing the victim again. Half an hour later, a haunted-looking Leo caught up, his eyes dark with malice. They found the location for the mission objective, a set of Starship blueprints, but they weren't there. Night was falling, and a cold rain began. Leo suddenly grabbed Ethan's arm, suggesting they split up to cover more ground. It was a trap, but time was running out. Ethan shook him off and went into the jungle alone. Minutes later, Leo's frantic cries for help echoed through the trees. He claimed his leg was broken, that he had fallen into a pit. Ethan ignored him, quickening his pace. But then Leo's voice changed, laced with righteous indignation. He accused Ethan of abandoning a teammate, of letting personal feelings compromise a mission. The accusation stung. As Ethan hesitated, the overwhelming scent of milk and fear exploded in the air. Leo had deliberately cut himself to release his pheromones. The sudden Omega distress signal blanked Ethan's alpha brain for a crucial second. In that moment, Leo lunged from the shadows, his hands closing around Ethan's throat as he dragged them both into a deep, dark pit. His last words were a hissed confession of hatred, of jealousy for Ethan's looks, his wealth, his hold on Jake. Ethan came to half an hour later at the bottom of the pit. Jake and the president were there. Leo was kneeling nearby, weaving a tearful story of how he'd seen Ethan fall and had bravely injured himself to send a pheromonal distress signal for help. Jake was yelling at him, calling his scent disgusting and threatening him if anything happened to Ethan. Yet he was also tearing a strip from his own sleeve to bandage Leo's superficial cut. He hadn't even looked at Ethan. The president helped Ethan to his feet. Ethan numbly pointed to a ledge he'd seen on the way down. The blueprints were there. Alongside the blueprints were 2 bars of chocolate, their only food. Jake snatched them and offered them to Ethan, while simultaneously berating Leo, telling him he didn't deserve any. The pain from the fall was a roaring fire in Ethan's back. He ignored Jake and started the trek toward the finish line. The rain turned into a torrential downpour. They huddled in a makeshift shelter built by the president. Ethan's feverish body soon gave out, and he passed out. He awoke 4 hours later to the president's worried face. He was burning up and hadn't eaten in over a day. Just as the president offered to get some chocolate from Jake, Jake and Leo returned from the woods. Jake looked annoyed, but Leo was flushed and hiding a shy smile, a tiny smudge of chocolate at the corner of his lips. It was obvious what had happened between them. Leo offered to help Ethan walk, his eyes gleaming with triumphant pity. He was flaunting Jake's preference, the fact that Jake had given him all the food while whispering reassurances. Ethan ignored him and pushed on. A few hours later, he stumbled. Leo rushed to his side again. Jake finally intervened, telling Ethan that Leo had saved his life and they should put their differences aside. Ethan turned and punched Jake squarely in the face. He snarled that if Jake believed that, he might as well believe Ethan was Leo's father. A cool, amused voice cut through the tension. "Looks like you've still got some fight left in you." It was Corbin, one of the exercise proctors, looking impossibly clean in a black tank top and tactical pants. He informed them the finish line was just a few hundred meters away, but first, they all owed him 200 push-ups. Leo paled, but seeing the others comply, he shakily got into position. Corbin strode over and kicked him lightly in the small of his back, ordering him to use proper form. Leo whimpered that his arm was injured. Corbin's voice was flat. He asked how 2 bars of chocolate could have failed to give him the strength for a single push-up. He knew exactly how Leo's arm had been injured. Jake tried to defend Leo, repeating the lie about the distress signal. Corbin cut him off. He said the debriefing would reveal who was a hero and who was a traitor, but for now, Jake could add 200 push-ups for talking back. Leo could add 200 for slacking. Jake's fists clenched, his pheromones flaring in defiance. Corbin kicked him so hard he flew several feet through the mud, then calmly added another 400 to his tally. Ethan's voice, raw and raspy, announced he was finished. He asked for permission to proceed. Corbin's gaze softened for a moment as he looked at him. Ethan grabbed the team's insignia from the president's pocket and ran. The push-ups had reopened the wounds on his back, and blood mixed with sweat soaked his shirt. A faint trace of dark wood and amber leaked into the air. The scent finally registered with Jake. His face contorted in horror as he realized how badly Ethan was hurt. He screamed Ethan's name and scrambled to run after him, but he was too late. Ethan collapsed as he crossed the finish line, falling into a strong, waiting embrace. A large tactical jacket enveloped him, smelling of kerosene and safety. Corbin's voice was a low rumble in his ear. He congratulated him on securing first place for his team. Then, under the cover of the embrace, he rubbed his cheek against the back of Ethan's neck, a possessive, territorial gesture. His voice dropped to a murmur, expressing his displeasure at the stench of the Omega on him, promising to punish him until his legs gave out if he ever smelled it again. The domineering scent of the S-Class Alpha was a strange comfort. Ethan leaned into the embrace, letting the world steady itself. A few feet away, Jake watched, his eyes red. He understood now, but the words of apology were lodged in his throat like stones. When Ethan's strength returned, he pushed away from Corbin just as Leo arrived at the finish line, a triumphant smile on his face. Before Leo could finish celebrating their victory, Ethan grabbed him by the collar, slapped him silent, and dragged him to the edge of a muddy embankment. He ignored the pleas and screams, telling Leo that he didn't fight him before only because the mission was more important. He declared that he would never abandon a true comrade on the battlefield, but he was ashamed to have ever been on a team with someone like Leo. Then he kicked him down the slope. Leo suffered 3 broken ribs and a shattered nose. Ethan spent a week in the infirmary with a severe infection. Corbin filed no official report. The feud was settled. Their team's first-place finish earned them an internship on the front lines before graduation. News of Ethan and Corbin's relationship spread. To uphold Corbin's honor, Ethan dutifully remarked him once a week. It became clear to everyone that Corbin was utterly besotted. He wore Ethan's scent like a badge of honor and would casually refer to Ethan as his little boyfriend in the middle of a crowded lecture. During Ethan's ruts, he was a constant, doting presence. Ethan had never known such tenderness during that volatile time and took full advantage, sprawling across Corbin's lap in his office, marking the S-Class Alpha with a sense of possessive glee. On the night of Ethan's 22nd birthday, the office air was thick with their mingled scents. Jake appeared in the doorway, holding a melting ice cream cake. He called Ethan's name, his voice choked with emotion, reminding him of their promise to always spend their birthdays together. He pleaded for forgiveness, blaming Leo for everything. Ethan didn't even turn around, pressing closer to Corbin. Corbin's fingers tapped rhythmically on the desk. He informed Mr. Thompson that it was after hours and he needed to leave. His partner was in the middle of his rut and couldn't be bothered. He added that he'd had a hard enough time coaxing him out of a bad mood the night before and didn't appreciate the interruption. The cake slipped from Jake's hands, and tears streamed down his face as the last of his composure shattered. Long after he left, Ethan broke the silence, reminding Corbin that their relationship was supposed to be fake, that maybe now was a good time to end it. Corbin rested his chin on Ethan's head, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. He agreed it was time to be clear. He confessed that nothing had been a coincidence. It had all been a deliberate plan. He loved the spring flowers, the summer trees, the autumn sunsets, the winter sun, and he loved Ethan every single day. He told him not to rush his answer. He would wait. Before graduation, their team was sent to the front lines. The Federation was in a state of constant low-grade war, and the chance to work on active-duty starships was a dream for any engineering student. They arrived at the base during an active engagement. The commander, a grizzled veteran, had only minutes to brief them. When he got to Leo, the only Omega, he barely glanced at his list of accolades before his eyes landed on Ethan. "We meet again, Ethan," he said, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. The commander knew his father, a top-tier mechanic buried somewhere on this very battlefield. In the ensuing silence, only Leo's disdainful whisper was audible. He scoffed that any mechanic who got himself killed must have been incompetent. Ethan ignored him. The commander, his time short, gave them their assignments and was about to leave when he turned back to Ethan. He asked if he was still close with Professor Corbin, remarking that it had only been 3 years since Corbin had left his command post to teach. Before Ethan could process the fact that Corbin had been a commander, the base alarms blared. The internship was over. They were now being drafted to fill a critical shortage of mechanics. The situation was dire. The commander assigned them relatively simple, but still dangerous tasks that required crossing enemy fire zones. It would be a solo mission for each of them. Ethan accepted without hesitation. Jake, after a moment, quietly pressed a worn talisman he'd carried for years into Ethan's hand. Ethan dropped it on the table. Leo protested loudly, arguing that an Omega shouldn't be sent to the front lines when there were Alphas available. He declared himself a special case, too valuable to be wasted. The commander slapped him across the face, snarling that his base had no room for cowards. Panicked, Leo turned to Jake, his eyes swimming with tears, begging for help. This time, Jake didn't even look at him. For hours into the mission, all contact was lost after a massive explosion near the president's last known coordinates was preceded by Leo's shriek over the comms. Sometime later, Jake stumbled out of the smoke, covered in blood, his pheromones bleeding uncontrollably into the air. He told Ethan it was hopeless, that the base was gone and they were trapped. He confessed that if he had to die, he was glad it was with Ethan. He didn't care if Corbin was better. He was the one who would be buried with him. The words filled Ethan with a final, profound disappointment. He tackled Jake, his fists flying. He screamed that Jake was just as pathetic as Leo, a coward who gave up. He was going to finish his mission and go home. Jake, coughing up blood, just laughed, a broken and obsessive sound, and refused to let him go. Suddenly, a voice crackled to life in his damaged headset. It was Corbin. He was off-world but had patched in. Ethan relayed his situation. Corbin gave him a new set of coordinates, a safe route to complete his task. Before signing off, he called Ethan's name. His voice was strained. He confessed that he had been one of the commanders during the battle where Ethan's father had died. He had been the closest to the explosion and had been haunted by it for years, the guilt driving him from his post. He told Ethan that meeting him, seeing his strength and dedication, had made him understand. To die for one's mission, for one's beliefs, was the highest honor for a mechanic. Jake, conscious again, heard it all. He heard the raw pain in Corbin's voice, and he heard the final whispered message before the signal died. Unconditional love is its own salvation. Ethan, please finish your mission and come back to me. I'm waiting for your answer. Only Ethan completed his assignment, returning with a badly injured Jake in tow. Leo had attempted to desert with a group of evacuated Omegas but was recognized and cast out. The class president found him and, true to his word to protect his teammates, tried to lead him to safety. But Leo, in his panic, misread the coordinates and led the president directly into an enemy ambush. Leo fled as the fire consumed his rescuer. He was captured shortly after. Influenced by enemy pheromones, his heat was triggered, and this time, there was no one to save him. After graduation, Ethan took his father's service number and became a frontline mechanic. Jake, discharged due to his injuries, went home to run his family's business. He refused every marriage proposal, telling everyone he was waiting for someone to come home. Ethan mailed him an inflatable doll with a note to get his head checked. Years later, on New Year's Eve, the base was festive. Commander Corbin, however, was in a foul mood, his rut making his pheromones an oppressive cloud as he searched the barracks. A tall, lean figure intercepted him, a mocking tone in his voice as he told Corbin to get a grip, asking if his little one had abandoned him. Corbin growled the man's name, Salas, and continued his search. Salas smirked, but was soon swept into an embrace by his own partner, a massive alpha who whined that he was hungry too. Corbin finally found Ethan in the main repair bay, tightening the last bolt on a damaged engine. As Ethan wiped grease from his face, he was lifted off his feet. Corbin's hot breath was on his neck as he licked a streak of oil from Ethan's cheek. He wished him a happy new year, then announced he was there to collect his gift. Before Ethan could protest, he was silenced by a deep, bruising kiss. At that moment, both their comms lit up with a news alert. Leo had been returned in a prisoner exchange. He would finally face trial for attempted murder, treason, and desertion. Having already birthed 4 children during his captivity, no Omega protection laws could shield him now. Justice was coming. As Ethan read the last line, the base alarm screamed to life. The festive mood vanished. Corbin's face grew dark, his pheromones spiking with frustration. Ethan just smiled, tapped him on the nose, and ran toward the assembly point. The sun was rising, and it was time for work. The sunset, and his lover would have to wait. His New Year's gift would be claimed another day.